Shockwaves tore through the grandeur of Washington, D.C.'s marble-lined hearing room as Cash Patel, now the FBI director, thundered a thick-bound dossier onto the gleaming mahogany table. The sound cracked like thunder, instantly suffocating. The murmurs that had just moments earlier hummed throughout the chamber. Time itself seemed to stop. Every eye in the room turned sharply to him. Senator Lindsey Graham stood motionless, his features momentarily betraying a flicker of dread before a rehearsed calm returned to his expression. Around them sat some of the most powerful individuals in the nation, senior senators, White House strategists, and hardened political reporters, all sensing that what was unfolding wasn't politics as usual. It was something far more dangerous. Cash's stare was unflinching, the intensity in his gaze a clear sign that he was about to reveal a truth no one in the room had anticipated. "What's in that file, Cash?" Lindsey asked, trying to sound in control, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Without a word, Cash stepped forward. His voice was icy. "Evidence, Lindsey. The kind that doesn't forgive. The kind that tears through the glitter you've so carefully layered over your record." A thin smile broke across Lindsey's face, forced and dry. "You think you can bring me down with papers? This wouldn't be your first stunt as FBI director." Cash didn't blink. "The papers don't lie, Senator, and unlike you, they don't cover their tracks." Lindsey leaned in, the politician, in him scrambling to retake the stage. "So, is this revenge, a vendetta, or is it just because I never endorsed your policies?" Around them, the room tensed again. The silence was taut, like a rope pulled to its breaking point. "This isn't political," Cash snapped. "It's moral, and you've already lost that compass." Lindsey tried to laugh, but it fell flat, brittle in the thickening tension. "Integrity," he said bitterly. "From you. That's rich." "I never claimed perfection," Cash replied, his tone sharp but steady. "But I face my faults. Can you?" Without waiting for an answer, Cash slowly opened the dossier. Every gesture was deliberate, measured as if each motion carved deeper into the room's unease. Documents slid forward, emails, contracts, financial trails, each one seemingly charged with radioactive truth. He picked up a printout, an email thread. Holding it high, he let the press and politicians catch a glimpse. "Explain this," he demanded. Lindsey's hands clenched, his eyes scanning the page before darting to read the room's temperature. The email, an exchange involving untraceable funding from a powerful interest group, was damning, even without full context. He knew the damage could be catastrophic if he misstepped. "That's only part of a conversation," Lindsey said quickly. His voice softened, sincere in appearance, but practiced. He turned to the room. "Context matters. You all know that. Will you hear mine?" Cash tilted his head. "You always have a story, Lindsey, but you can't rewrite the stains already on your name." There were murmurs, small, disbelieving ones, from corners of the room that had once backed Lindsey. Unconditionally, he took a slow breath. He could feel it, the weight of the stairs, the crumbling foundation beneath him. "This is turning into a witch hunt," he offered, trying to regain sympathy. "Let's step aside, talk this through." "No." Cash's voice was calm but final. "This needs to happen here, in the open. You still have a move, Senator, but do you have the courage to make it?" In that instant, the years of political alliances, transactional loyalties, and party-line battles fell away. What remained was raw, undeniable. The truth was circling, ready to devour any lie thrown in its path. The room was suffocating now. Silence draped over every breath. Lindsey looked around. People he once relied on for quiet support were now unreadable. What had he truly built, and what was about to fall? Cash spoke again, his tone now low but cutting. "Silence can be more damning than a lie. Will you let these documents speak for you?" Lindsey's voice returned, but it lacked the surety that once commanded entire chambers. "Every story needs context. These are misinterpretations, misunderstandings. You're cherry-picking details that suit your case." Cash smiled, not kindly. "Does your context include broken promises? Abuses of power? Should we walk through them one by one?" Lindsey stared back, trying to channel his inner strength. You're getting dangerously close to slander, Cash. Are you sure of what you're implying? I wouldn't be standing here if I wasn't. The atmosphere thickened with curiosity, doubt, and something darker, reckoning. Those once loyal now whispered to one another, unsure whether to retreat or confront what the papers exposed. Lindsey adjusted his tie, his movements calculated but lacking confidence. I don't deny missteps, he admitted. But these papers, they paint a picture that isn't whole. Then let's finish the painting, Cash replied, stepping forward. Let's peel every layer back. The room leaned in. Every breath seemed held. Lindsey's thoughts tumbled. His reputation, his career, the network he'd spent years constructing. All dangling. Cash pressed. You speak of stories, but what about consequences? These people... He gestured toward the press, the advisors, the staffers. They're not characters in your narrative. They're real. They've felt the impact of your decisions. The whispers rose again. Lindsey's armor, the controlled, always prepared persona, was cracking, and everyone saw it. A flash of something flickered in his eyes. Pain. Perhaps guilt. He looked at Cash, his longtime adversary, and now perhaps his final mirror. Cash didn't gloat. He simply offered, "This is your call to accountability, not to win, not to save face, but to become something more than a survivor of scandal." And, with those words, the crowd fell into a hush, stunned. The challenge was set. Would Lindsey answer it? The echoes of Part 1 still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. In that suffocating silence, the reality of what just transpired weighed heavily on every witness inside the grand Washington Hall. Faces turned back and forth between Cash Patel and Senator Lindsey Graham, as if watching not a political debate, but a reckoning unfold in real time. Lindsey stood still. His mind, usually sharp and calculating, now felt like a minefield. Each thought could detonate his credibility further. Across from him, Cash remained a pillar of restraint, his face revealing not anger but the stern expression of a man who had waited too long for this truth to surface. Cash broke the silence. His voice was calm, yet underlined with an invisible edge. Lindsey. Sometimes silence screams louder than any defense. These documents, he said, motioning to the spread of evidence still open on the table, tell a story. But I'm asking, do you want to speak your part of it? Lindsey's eyes scanned the room. Every face bore an expression of quiet judgment. These weren't just colleagues. These were his witnesses. Some had backed him through the years, but now... They waited. He cleared his throat, voice low but deliberate. Every accusation deserves context. What you've shared, yes, they're emails, donations, contracts, but none of them show the intent, the complexities behind decisions, the nuance. But even as he spoke, it was clear the room wasn't buying it. Not entirely. Cash's smile returned, tight, cold, razor-sharp. Context, you say? Does context explain power grabs? Or promises made behind closed doors only to be broken as soon as the cameras were off? Lindsey's posture tightened. He tried to hold his ground. You're painting me as corrupt, Cash, but politics isn't pure. You know that. Cash's expression didn't flinch. No, but it doesn't have to be filthy. The two men stared each other down. The tension was not just between them. It was in every breath the audience took. This was a duel of truth versus denial, accountability versus excuse. You're treading dangerously close to slander, Lindsey warned again, but the heat had left his words. Cash nodded, but didn't retreat. If I were wrong, you'd have shut me down already, but you haven't. Because part of you knows this isn't fiction, it's history finally catching up. A ripple of movement stirred among the crowd. Aides, reporters, even fellow senators leaned toward each other, whispers. Buzzing, Lindsey could feel the shift. He looked for support in familiar faces, but what stared back was caution, skepticism, distance. You think I built all this by accident? He asked suddenly, voice rising in a blend of frustration and desperation. 15 years of public service, of legislation, of bipartisan reform, erased because of a few conveniently highlighted emails? No, Cash replied, his voice softer now, but stronger, firmer. But achievements mean nothing if they're built on buried bodies of principle. The cost of progress can't be paid with other people's trust. Lindsey looked at him long, eyes blazing with a mixture of defiance and weariness. Then he said almost quietly, "You think this moment will break me?" "No," Cash said. "I think it will reveal you." And then came the unexpected. From the back of the room, a voice rang out, clear, cutting. "Cash is right. We deserve the truth." Heads turned. It was Nathan, an influential advisor who had once championed Lindsey's career. His voice gave weight to the doubts already spreading. Lindsey spun to face him. "So now you're turning this into a mob?" Nathan didn't flinch. "No, you've already built the crowd. Now we just want to see if you still have the courage to face them." The room was split now, some watching to see a man destroyed, others watching to see if redemption was still possible. Cash stepped in, his tone shifting. "This isn't an ambush, Lindsey. This is a mirror. Look into it. See what's been reflected. Back at you, power, yes, but at what cost?" There was a beat of silence. Then Lindsey replied, "You talk about consequences, but you don't know what it's like to make impossible choices. You're not the one who has to balance loyalty and leadership, the nation's needs with party expectations." "I don't envy those decisions," Cash said, "but I will question the ones that leave people betrayed." A hush fell again, but beneath it, emotion stirred. Shame, reflection, resistance. Then Cash spoke again, this time more personal. "Do you remember that night?" he asked. Lindsey froze. "When you chose ambition over commitment, tell everyone about that night." A fresh wave of unease passed through the crowd. Something unspoken was now standing at the edge of revelation. Lindsey didn't answer right. Away. He seemed to fold in on himself slightly, like someone hearing a ghost whisper too loud to ignore. Finally he replied, "I never broke a promise." Cash waited. "I made decisions, some I questioned, but each one was made with a purpose." Cash's eyes narrowed. "And do you still stand by that purpose?" A beat passed. Then Lindsey said, "I thought I did. Until now." The crowd didn't cheer. There was no applause. But the silence changed. It softened. It felt like a breath had finally been exhaled. Cash nodded. "That's a start." For a moment, the confrontation no longer looked like a trial. It looked like a turning point. Then Cash asked one more question. "Lindsey, what's it like, really like, living under the weight of pretending everything is fine?" Lindsey hesitated, then let out a slow breath. "You try to build something perfect, but it becomes a tower of sand, and no matter how high you build it, the waves always come." Cash stepped closer, then tear it down, and build again, brick by brick. Honestly this time, a quiet stirred in the room, the whisper of something rare in D.C. Not power, not politics, but truth. The weight of Lindsey Graham's words still echoed in the chamber, words shaped by vulnerability, delivered with the trembling breath of a man who had just begun to remove the armor he wore for years. For the first time in the hearing, the air didn't feel hostile. It felt heavy with reflection, but moments of clarity often invite shadows. As Lindsey steadied himself, a presence in the room shifted. Someone was moving through the edges of the crowd with purpose. A familiar face emerged from the quiet, a man whose reputation carried authority, but whose past relationship with Lindsey was complex. Thomas. Once a trusted political strategist, now a calculated observer, Thomas stepped into the light. "We've heard enough," he said, his voice strong but even. "It's time we move from accusations to something that actually changes things." Lindsey looked up, cautious. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" "Doing what I should have done earlier," Thomas answered calmly. "I'm not here to defend you, and I'm not here to condemn you. I'm here because this is bigger than both of you." The crowd turned their attention. A new energy coursed through the hall. Thomas was neither ally nor adversary. He was opportunity. "What do you propose?" Cash asked. That we stop treating this like a trial and start treating it like a transition, Thomas said. This nation doesn't need perfect politicians. It needs leaders who admit fault and forge forward. There was something about his tone, measured, humble, and yet absolutely clear, that made even the skeptics in the room lean in. Lindsey swallowed, the ground beneath him still fragile. So what are you suggesting? Some kind of alliance. I'm suggesting a coalition, Thomas said. A space where every decision from this point forward is held accountable, not by speeches but by structure. Cash's eyes narrowed, assessing. Oversight, transparency, Thomas clarified. Real, visible, tangible. It was a turning point. What began as a hostile takedown was now transforming into a blueprint for reform. The hall, filled with power brokers and press, had never felt more alive, more dangerous, and more hopeful. Cash stepped forward. Lindsey, if this is to mean anything, we can't just talk about redemption. We have to build it, brick by brick. Lindsey nodded slowly. Then let's start. Not for me, but for those we've failed, those who believed and were let down. Ripple of movement stirred across the room, but not everyone was ready to fall in line. From the shadows came another voice, sharper, colder. All of this sounds noble, but what about us? It was Michael, once one of Lindsey's closest confidants, now his most bitter critic. What about the promises made to those who were silenced by your ambition? Michael asked, stepping into the light. His stare was razor-focused on Lindsey. You talk about unity, but unity without truth is still deception. The air shifted again. A storm threatened to roll back over the fragile bridge just constructed. I won't deny that people were hurt, Lindsey said, voice firm. But healing only begins when the wounds are exposed. Michael's glare remained. Words. Easy. Show me something more. Cash stepped beside Lindsey. Then give us the chance, stand with us, be part of the solution, not the resistance. The hall trembled with tension. If Michael rejected this call, everything could fall apart. A pause. Then, Michael exhaled. One condition. You don't forget us this time. You don't move on without facing everything. Lindsey stepped forward. No more blind spots, no more silence. You'll be in the room. Every time. That was the oath. That was the vow. Thomas nodded in approval. Cash offered no smile, just a look of resolve. This alliance was not born of convenience. It was forged in fire, heated by conflict, cooled by truth. But even then, as the room slowly returned to something resembling calm, another presence lingered at the back. Philip, a man who had not spoken, who had once been Lindsey's moral compass, and now, silent, Cash saw him. So did Lindsey. Philip, Cash called. We need your voice. Philip looked up. His silence was thunderous. I find myself caught, he said finally, his voice soft but heavy, between wanting to believe and fearing that belief is foolish. Then test us, Lindsey said. Hold us accountable. Be the one who never lets us fall back. Philip's eyes met Lindsey's. For a moment, nothing was said. Then, he gave a nod. Small, but it was enough. The coalition was fragile, but it was forming. Cash turned to the crowd. This isn't just about fixing Lindsey's legacy, he said. It's about reshaping how we lead, and how we're led. The crowd buzzed. Discussions sparked. Journalists scribbled. Staffers whispered. Something real was starting. Thomas stepped up once more. Let this be the beginning of a new kind of governance, transparent, inclusive, and unforgiving of deceit. And with that, the third act of this political saga ended, not with applause, but with the silence of something deeply earned, respect, and the first breath of hope. The hall sat in hushed reverence, as though the very walls were holding their breath. The coalition had been spoken into existence, but would it survive the fire yet to come? Cash Patel, standing beneath the grand rotunda lights, turned slowly, as if carrying the weight of a secret too long confined. There's something more, he said, his voice low but unshakable. A truth I've held back, Not to protect myself, but to protect others. But no more. Lindsey's gaze snapped toward him. Cash reached into his briefcase and pulled out a smaller, older file. The second dossier. Gasps rippled through the room. What is that? Lindsey asked, his tone cautious, almost dreading the answer. This, Cash said, holding it aloft, contains the decisions we made under pressure, choices driven not by ethics but by fear, hidden truths, not just yours, but mine too. The crowd stiffened. This wasn't just another attack, it was a confession. Cash continued, his voice carrying pain. I allowed certain compromises. I thought I was protecting the mission, but in doing so I betrayed my own standards. Lindsey stared, stunned. This wasn't the calculated destroyer he'd faced earlier. This was a man standing naked in his truth. And then, Cash turned. But you, Lindsey, you made the final call. We built something together, a project meant to change the system, but it collapsed under the weight of our own ambition. The memory came rushing back, of late-night meetings, whispered promises, and the one email that changed it all. A decision, made behind closed doors, a partnership severed. Lindsey stepped forward, the fire gone from his eyes. What remained was sorrow. I took that deal, I justified it, I told myself it was necessary, but it wasn't. The room fell still. Philip finally broke the silence. Why now? He asked. Why expose yourselves like this? Because truth delayed is justice denied, Cash answered. And the system we want to fix can't begin until we clean our side of the street. The crowd nodded slowly, judges, journalists, aides, all recognizing the weight of that honesty. Thomas stepped forward, his presence grounding the storm. Let's make this count. Let's create something that outlives this moment. Lindsey turned to the audience. No more hidden forums. I propose we establish a permanent platform where all future decisions are made in the open, with public oversight. Laura, a well-known policy critic, raised an eyebrow. And who will lead? This? No one, Cash replied. Everyone, it must belong to the people, not one man. The murmurs swelled, agreement beginning to take root. Even Michael, once the harshest voice in the room, gave a nod of reluctant respect. But still, Philip remained hesitant. Cash looked at him. Your voice kept us grounded. Now we need it more than ever. Philip rose. Then I'll serve, not as a symbol, but as a reminder. That trust is earned. And watched. The alliance solidified, not with declarations, but with decisions. And just as they began to close this painful but transformative chapter, Cash took one final step forward. This isn't about erasing the past, he said. It's about facing it. Together. Every leader. Every citizen. He looked to Lindsey. And you? Lindsey lifted his chin, the man who once feared transparency now embracing its weight. I will stand accountable, not for applause, but for integrity. The crowd, so long silent, finally responded. Not with cheers, but with a quiet thunder of approval, a sound more powerful than any speech, because this wasn't victory, this was evolution. The hall, once divided, now stood on the edge of something new, a legacy redefined not by perfection but by the bravery to begin again.